which is lovely and quiet. So welcome everybody to our new session of MOGUL meetings. It's lovely to welcome people from all over the world to get together with our mutual interest on South African Jewish history. And we're very pleased to have today Ted Botha, who is a best-selling author and journalist who's written for a number of newspapers and magazines across the world. His non-fiction books include Mongo, Adventures in Trash. Sounds very intriguing, Ted. By Bloomsbury, The Girl with the Crooked Nose, Random House, Daisy DeMelka, Jonathan Ball, and now Hollywood on the Veldt, also published by Jonathan Ball. And he splits his time between Cape Town and New York. So welcome, Ted, and we're very eager to hear about the Mogul, the forgotten Mogul, I.W. Schlesinger. So carry on.
Well, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm not used to talking on Zoom. I'm more used to talking to people who can react to me. So, but it's nice to see all your faces. You used the term forgotten Mogul, and I was actually looking through all the old manuscripts I wrote about Schlesinger. And I must tell you, he's taken me a long time to write. And if I say I wrote 40 manuscripts about him, that's probably not underestimating. And one of the first ones was The Forgotten Mogul. And I think you might wonder how an Afrikaans Catholic person who's not Jewish got onto this guy from a very early age. And he's bugged me for decades until I finally got this book out. And I heard about him when I was a child growing up in Pretoria. And I've always been in love with movies. And I heard about this man in South Africa who had made movies long time ago. And, growing up in Pretoria in the 1970s, I thought, well, where did this man come from? Where was he? How come I've never heard of him, and what did he do? And kind of the story has lingered with me over the years until about 15 years ago, I started doing some research, and it's taken me all this time to kind of figure out who this man was. And a lot of other stuff came in between, like his agricultural things, whether he got into shipping or not, into radio. I'm sure all of you who know IW know another aspect of his life. It's very easy for me to say that I think he's underestimated and he was this powerhouse that the world really didn't recognize because I've written a book about him. But I really do think it's true. I think that if he was in England or if he was in America full time during his life, he would have been on a completely different level. Um, but we tend to think of South Africa, or I'm sure Australians find the same thing, or Canadians, that you're relegated to the periphery of the colonial world and people don't take you as seriously. And I think that's also a problem that he had because he did gravitate towards, he went to London a lot, he went to New York a lot, almost every year, more than once a year. And he kept his finger in pies over there as well, but he always came back to South Africa. And I think it frustrated him no end that he didn't kind of achieve the same level of recognition that, William Randolph Hearst or Henry Ford or somebody like that got in America. And also the Hollywood producers who, he would have knocked out of the ballpark because here he was running probably 80 companies when he died, and they were running one company, their studio, and he was doing it all. So I think he was quite an amazing guy. And I know Geraldine has asked me to talk about agriculture. And there were like themes of agriculture that I came across, like Zabadila, which I'm sure many of you have heard about, Ken Drew in the Eastern Cape, Langholm, the Pineapple Estate. Apparently he had, and I do mention some of this in Hollywood on the Veldt, he had tens of thousands of sheep. So, I mean, I always love the idea of this guy who came from the Lower East Side of New York doing these agriculture projects in Africa. And I mean, there's like a wonderful story that Eric Rosenthal tells in his unpublished biography of Schlesinger about how in 1914 he got into I think he had a Talbot or a Napier then, and he had this driver, and he said to the driver, "We're going up into the northern Transvaal. Just keep on driving. I'll show you the way." And they went over these bumpy roads, and they landed up in the middle of the veldt, and he just told him to stop. And he said, "This is where I'm going to have my orange estate." And I mean, I feel it's kind of gathered a lot of romanticism along the way in Rosenthal's telling. But I do love this image of him going out there and doing this. And they collected the soil samples that he was taking back to Pretoria with them or Johannesburg. And they got stuck. They came back in a hell of a storm and they got stuck on this terrible road coming back. Must have been where Petersburg is today or Paul Petersburg, somewhere around there. And when they got stuck in the rain, IW just left the car and he went to the railroad and he just kind of flagged down a train that was coming past. And he said, "I'll see you back in the city." And he left his driver with his sedan out in the countryside. And the driver was back there the next day and IW got back there with the train. But I mean, there's such a lot of chutzpah about this guy. Um, and kind of, I know that there are a lot of negative stories. I came across a lot of negative stories about Schlesinger while I was doing research. And I tell you, I couldn't help but like this guy. There was just something about him that, he just had a lot of pluck and a lot of go. Um, so what I'd like to do is maybe take you through some slides on the PowerPoint and just to show you a little bit of the progress that I followed in the book. I've included some agricultural stuff as well in between, seeing Geraldine asked about that. And maybe then afterwards we can have a little bit of a chat.
Excellent.
Okay, also, if I can add right at the end of the slides, I put together a very short video. And what it does is it actually it takes about 30 seconds of four great movies that were made in about 1915, 16, 17. And two of those movies are Schlesinger's. And it's kind of difficult to believe, but Schlesinger made the biggest movies ever at that stage. Um, and why I say this is because the crowd scenes, as you'll see, and that's why I did the video, was his crowd scenes were just incredible. I mean, nothing like them had ever been done before. Whereas, D.W. Griffith had just made Birth of a Nation, which they say I.W. tried to copy in style, really, not in story. Um, D.W. Griffith in this big movie used maybe 800 extras. The numbers were inflated for the publicity. They said like 15,000 or whatever, but it was really 800. Schlesinger used 15,000 extras. And that these were all black people in a very different South Africa back in 1916 is just incredible. And he did it not once, but twice. I mean, for two different movies and many, many crowd scenes. So you'll see in this video at the end, it gives Cabiria, which is like the big Italian spectacle, which was made in 1914. Then D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation in 1915, and then Schlesinger's Foot Trackers and Symbol of Sacrifice, which was his Anglo-Zulu War movie in 1917-18. So, and that'll be right at the end, and it'll just give you a sense of the proportion of his movies. And I know they've all been forgotten today. And somebody like Martin Scorsese, who restores old movies, should hear about him because I know he's never heard of him and he should, because these movies are quite incredible. Anyway, so if we can go can I go ahead, Geraldine?
So you go to share and
Okay, we got all that.
your little green. Yeah, there you are. And
So
then
I'm going to lose everybody.
slideshow,
Oh yeah, first.
slideshow from beginning. There we are.
Okay.
Now, if you want to move on, you move your arrow buttons on your there.
Okay, so I've lost sight of everybody, so I'm just going to carry on talking here, Geraldine. Just interrupt me if you need to.
We can see you fine. It
Okay,
depends
so
on how people are viewing it. You know, if you look at maybe side by side, speaker and PowerPoint, that's a good way to watch it side by side. But we can
um,
see, I can see you and I can see your slide.
okay. So the this is the man. This is I love this picture because it's him in all his finery, and apparently he was impeccably dressed every day. And there's a description somewhere, I actually lost it, talking about how he spent so much time putting himself together every day. And he got up very, very early in the morning and went on till maybe 11 at night. Um, this is a picture that I added in the book, which I really liked because I compared Johannesburg at the time with Los Angeles, which had the ridges and just the climate and a lot of similarities. And I'm not sure that Schlesinger was thinking about that when he started what he wanted to create his own Hollywood in South Africa. But there were a lot of similarities between Johannesburg and Los Angeles. And I love this one. This is the old, I think it's the Gordon Stewart Murray Mansions or whatever, up on the left-hand side there, which is now where I think it's become the West Cliff Hotel now. So, and this is all towards the Zoo Lake side here. Um, this is, of course, the Carlton Hotel where he was on the top floor. I don't know how much of the top floor he had, but I'm sure it was quite a lot. It's described as the penthouse. And when he bought the Carlton Hotel from Solly Joel in 1922, he later put on another 3 floors. So Solly Joel was a very good friend of his, and he always wanted him to buy it because I gather that Carlton didn't, was a bit of a millstone around his neck, and Schlesinger was. So Schlesinger always forsook staying in a house. I think it was maybe because when he went to New York and London, he always stayed in apartments. And maybe it was just the Manhattanite in him. He never wanted to live in a house. So he lived in the top floor for a long time, and the Carlton was his home. And when he bought it, he had already drawn up apparently a 100-page list of things that needed to be done, to everything to what people wore, to how they should answer the telephone, to what should be done to stop theft in the hotel, and so forth. Anyway, that was his home. This is his office on Market Square. It no longer exists, but that was where he based himself. He had a lot of businesses, but um, this was where he set himself up. And apparently he had it was very difficult to find his office because he hid down a long corridor of winding corridor of going up and down steps. And then when you finally landed up at the end, there were like several doors and none of them had any markings on them. So you had to actually know where you were going to find him because he really didn't want to be bothered by, small things. This is where his entertainment business started, was the Empire on Commissioner Street. This was the biggest theater in Johannesburg. It was the third incarnation of the Empire. When he bought it, the whole entertainment industry in South Africa was going bang for various reasons. Probably the most important was that movies had been introduced into entertainment in America, and all of a sudden these theaters, and there were a lot of them in Johannesburg, it was a real center of entertainment. Think shows were brought from the West End, from Broadway. It was seen as one of the centers of the world for entertainment. And suddenly all these theaters, and many of them were individually owned, they were all had these high overheads for bringing out tour groups, orchestras, all their equipment, putting them in hotels, keeping them around for a month. And suddenly movies came along and people wanted movies. And so they had to spend more on movies as well. And then they started going to theaters less and wanted the movies. And so Schlesinger came in and he said, if I can buy all of them, I'll buy them. And so he got a really great deal, bought as many as he could, and kept on buying after that. But this was his first, the Empire, and he put his offices for his entertainment businesses on the upper floors until he built his studio at Killarney. This was the first man that he brought out of importance, which was Joseph Albrecht. He was a young British, he might not look very young there, but he was actually 21 when he was brought out from England and he worked for British Pathé as a newsman. And I think it was very important for Schlesinger to get somebody who was interested in news and was good with the camera. And I think the news part is very important because news programs weren't big in those days. I mean, there was British Pathé, which started in 1910, and in 1913, Schlesinger started African Mirror, which became the longest running newsreel in the world. And I mean, they didn't do news events like we think of them today, but they did, the mayor cutting a ribbon and a railway station opening and a car crash and a soccer tournament. But he went on to make some really interesting things. And it was mostly, I think, because of Albrecht. They made what would be considered documentaries today, but I mean, the word was only created in about 1926, which is about 10 years later. But he would send, I mean, he sent a cameraman to the Desolation Islands, which was near Antarctica, and he filmed things down there. He sent the same guy, a guy named Frederick Ailiff, to East Africa, where he spent 6 months going to the Rwenzori's, to the Spice Islands, did something on the slave trade. Albrecht himself went to Madagascar, where he said no one with a camera had ever gone before. And all of these were figured in African Mirror's shorts, which were shown before all the movies that were shown at Schlesinger's theaters. And this was actually taken in the Kango Caves, which was very unusual. And it was also where they shot part of King Solomon's Mines when they shot that in 1918. This is some more of the cameramen who went up to East Africa during the First World War. So they had a very popular series um, on the men fighting in East Africa. And that's the guy in the center there, just off center, is Humphreys, L. Humphreys. A lot of their names are not always clear because, like the black actors who acted for Schlesinger, the cameramen got very little publicity, despite all the fantastic work that they did. This is Aleph in the center who went to the Desolation Islands with some, I think these were Norwegian sailors. And I mean, this is 1918, 1919, which you can imagine is quite fantastic. A cameraman going off, Shackleton and his cameraman had barely done their trip, and here was Schlesinger sending off his cameraman to the Desolation Islands. Hold on. Yeah, this is so he also had a movie magazine which he was called Stage and Cinema, which he started at the same time that he started his entertainment empire, and he really um, made it a kind of a news magazine as well. So you would get a story about fashions in London, and then you'd get the story about the 1914 strike or the 1922 strike. So, here you have protesters gathering. You have on the lower hand, right-hand side, you have men gathering up the bodies of, other black people who had been killed. On the top right-hand side, you have the protesters and the police clashing. Um, so it was, he was quite a pioneer in covering news as well. I mean, movies were not just about um, the frou-frou, ladies in fancy dresses, drama. Um, it was also, and I think he saw the fact that news was entertainment. I mean, you can see it today. And in many ways, he was way ahead of his time when he saw things like that. Um, this is the studio he built. I mean, it doesn't look anything major, but one must remember that this is at Killarney. So this is a two-story building. It had an elevator inside. It was about 40,000 square feet, so I guess about 4,000 square meters. So he had a lot of stuff in there, but he also had outside stages and outside buildings for other things. Um, but one must remember also that in Hollywood, Hollywood was barely starting at that stage. So it was a lot of farmland outside Los Angeles. Most studios were, they weren't even called studios. They were in, film companies were in barns and shacks and, buildings. And the first one to do a bricks and mortar building was Carl Laemmler, who did Universal in about 1915. I think he finished in about 1916. And this building went up in 1917. And I think in many ways, Schlesinger was trying to copy Lemler and the things he did at Universal City. It was also a piece of ground that, so this was on a place called, it had been Cook's Estate, but it became Killarney, and Schlesinger bought it in about 1906. And people said, he was crazy to buy this piece of property way outside the city. And really, it was only about 3 or 4 kilometers outside the city, but it was considered far then. And the same thing happened in Los Angeles, where Lemler bought property in the San Fernando Valley, which then became Universal City. So there are many, many similarities between the two men. And they're also both very, very short. So this is one of the outside sets that he built where they shot movies, and that is that's Houghton in the background, if anybody knows Johannesburg. Um, and this big area in between is where the highway, one of the highways, one of the roads goes, I think Joe Slovo Drive or anyway. And so I think the wilds would be to your right here, off the picture. Yep, women editing film prints in one of the buildings on Killarney. This would be about 1919, 1918. This was in the costume department where they had to make thousands and thousands of costumes for Zulu warriors, for the Voortrekkers, and then the Anglo-Zulu movie, Anglo-Zulu War, and a lot of British officers and soldiers' uniforms and bell tents and so forth. And this was Goba, who became probably the most famous of Schlesinger's black actors. And this was a movie he made called The Zulu's Heart, Zulu's Devotion. There are two of them. D.W. Griffith made one in about 1908, and it was about a Zulu who saves this white Afrikaner or Boer child. And then Schlesinger replicated it, but instead of using actors in blackface, and the New Jersey hillside for Africa, he used somewhere outside Johannesburg, and he started using black actors for real. And Goba, I mean, no one's really sure. I mean, the records are not great on this, but I think the most obvious obvious story is that he was a gardener who worked for Schlesinger, and he took to acting, and he did really well. He died a few years later, in his 40s already, and so his career only lasted about 3 or 4 movies. This was a scene on Market Square. So they started shooting before they had a studio and ground to shoot it on. They shot downtown. So Eloff Street, Pritchard Street, Market Square, all the people in the background are onlookers. And this is just a comedy. I think it's called The Water Cure or The Doctor's Dilemma, something like this. One of these short movies that Schlesinger made. And this is the devil attacking some guy in his dream. It's kind of a slapstick comedy. But apparently they caused a huge sensation when he shot these movies downtown. And this is the actor playing Dingaan. It was his first role. He was apparently working at a police station in Stanger, and he was recruited to. They reckoned he had the right stature and bearing about him to play Dingaan. And the man next to him is an American called Harold Shaw, who was a well-known director being used in England at the time. And he didn't want to go back to America because America hadn't joined the war yet, and he felt very badly about that. And he refused to go back to America and to Hollywood. And so Schlesinger jumped in and said, "Would you please come to South Africa and make big movies here?" And I think if Shaw had lived longer, he probably would have become a huge director in Hollywood. But like many directors back in those days, he was fond of the bottle, and he died in and he actually had a huge set too with Schlesinger in Johannesburg about um, his lunchtime sprees to Craighall Park with another man on the set and the girls that they took along with them. And he died in a car crash in Hollywood I guess about 6 or 7 years later after he left South Africa. This lady was that gentleman's wife. So her name was, oh gosh, it's like, uh, I'm forgetting it. Anyway, so she was quite a well-known actress at the time, also American, and she came out with Harold Shaw um, when he came to South Africa to direct, and Schlesinger made her his lead actress, at least for a few pictures, until the set two with Harold Shaw when he fired him. So she left as well. And the guy on the right, I think, is Holger Peterson, who was a Danish guy who landed up not working out with his dream to be in the gold mining industry. So he became an actor instead. You can't really see here, but he's actually very handsome. And I guess he saw himself as kind of becoming a little matinee idol. And that was shot. That was the Foot Trackers. So she plays the young love interest, and he is a ne'er-do-well who's after her. So this is also from the Voortrekker movie, and this is when Piet Retief and his followers are at Dingaan's kraal. I love this shot; it's very dramatic. The all the kraals you see there were about 70 of them that they built on Killarney. So you can imagine back in 1915, in a very kind of hectic South Africa where they've just had the 1914 rebellion and the Afrikaners are very kind of volatile and just ready for something to go wrong. And Schlesinger comes and he builds a huge Zulu kraal in the middle of a white area, and he brings hundreds of people to live there. So he created an actual village. So the tall man you saw in the picture with Harold Shaw, who played Dingaan, he came up from Zululand with several hundred people. We were all his extended family, and they became the crew of a lot of the movies that IW would shoot that needed African extras in big scenes. Um, I mean, this, of course, he had to employ a lot of people extra to come in, and I think a lot of them came from the municipal compounds, which they had around the city. So I think these ones they were always used on a Sunday, which was their holiday. And anyway, I love the scene. I think it's quite a dramatic, great picture. And this then is taken at the Battle of Blood River, which they shot outside Johannesburg. And I mean, very interesting about it, you can see all the people standing on the hillside nearby. And apparently there were thousands of people who turned up, white and black, to come and see this whole thing. And I actually describe it, and I start the book in this scene because a real battle started taking place. Because when the Zulus came down the hill and they were attacking the laager, a bunch of guys who weren't supposed to be there got on set, and they actually started shooting for real at the oncoming Zulus, and so a real battle broke out. Um, One guy died, but I mean, he actually drowned in the river as they were trying to escape. And a lot of people were injured. And I mean, it was quite spectacular. But I've loved the fact that there are people on the hillside watching all of this. Here's the poster for the movie. An interesting thing about this is so the the movie was if you go into American movies in about 1923, there was a big Western that came out called The Covered Wagon, and it was the biggest movie of the year. It won the Academy Award for the Best Picture. And if you look at the poster for that movie, it's exactly the same as this one. And unbeknownst to them, IW, or maybe beknownst to them, IW had made the first big sky, as they call it, big sky Western, which is all about, open campfires, romantic interest out under the stars, battles with indigenous population, not the shoot 'em up kind of Western, which was very popular, but this very big open land Western. So IW had actually made this open sky Western like 6, 7 years before America did. And even though he tried to get his movies into America, America was really closing shop for foreigners. After this First World War, and during the First World War, they just didn't want, they wanted to establish themselves as kind of the big movie making country of the world. And they did make it very difficult for foreigners to come in. And even though Schlesinger tried and even opened up an office in New York and a small studio, in 1917, he really never managed to get any traction there. And they did bring in this movie in about 19, a couple of years later called, and it was sold as The Pioneers in America. Um, so Adolf Zukor, who was the head of Paramount, who made the big first Western in America, The Covered Wagon, he probably did know about The Pioneers and he probably even saw it. But to say that he copied the Voortrekkers, I mean, there's no proof that I could find of that, but most people think that's what happened. This is the opening of the Voortrekkers, which is called Winning a Continent in English in London. So this, as you can see, this is the West End cinema. And it was a big deal, It was Jan Smuts was in town for the War Cabinet meeting, and he had a special showing. There was a special showing that he and some of the government went to see, and at a special dinner for him. In the city, he said to people that they should really go and see this movie. So and Jan Smuts was a friend of Schlesinger's, a longtime friend. This is the office. This is the building where Schlesinger had an office on Times Square. It's where the Paramount building now is. So Adolf Zukor, another Hollywood producer who was very small and bore a lot of resemblances to Schlesinger, and I'm sure they knew each other because they used to live in the same hotel in New York, the Savoy, and Max Schlesinger, who was IW's brother and was his main man in New York, was always at the Savoy. So it's quite clear that he and Zukor crossed paths and obviously knew each other. So this is the first agriculture picture. So this is the building of a dam. I don't know if you can see all the people there, but this is the building of a dam up at Sabadila. There were two dams built to irrigate the orange estate, which he wanted to make the biggest orange estate in the world. And I think this is the Comrie Dam. Anyway, I find it quite amazing. So this is one of the pictures that appeared in his movie magazine because he loved to publicize his own businesses. He didn't like to publicize himself, Schlesinger. That's why his story is not very well known because he hated the limelight. But he did like to publicize his businesses. This was on the set of the Anglo-Zulu War. Again, we have the setting of the battle and the camping setup. I'm not sure if this was Isandlwana. It could have been. This was another actor, and they don't even have his name. So he played Setshwayo, the Zulu chief in during the Anglo-Zulu War. I love this picture as well. Very regal and atmospheric. And this is if you can check, if you can see there, the people go off into the distance. They go off very far. I don't know if you can see this in the picture, but this is the kind of numbers that Schlesinger would gather for his crowd scenes, which was just incredible. So this is for some of the Zulus going off to war. Um, so he used the some of the people that he gathered in the Zulu who were living in his kraal, as he called it, on Killarney. This very buff guy in the middle is the main character, and sorry, he's the main character in a comedy series which was about these two guys who always have a scheme to do something. And this one is called the roller skating rink. And they reckoned if white people can have roller skating rinks, why can't they have roller skating rinks? And so they gathered a whole bunch of people together to make roller skates for them. And of course, everything goes wrong in the end. Um, but I think it's Daniel, and I don't know who the other characters, the main character's name was, and they were the two guys who go about their comedy routine. Um, This is the Queen of Sheba. So there were these massive um, sets of old palaces from the Rider Haggard stories that were built at Killarney. And this is just a close-up of one of them with the Queen of Sheba arriving at the beginning of King Solomon's Mines. Um, yeah, now we're going back to agriculture again. So this is the original buildings that were built on Zebedela. So when I went up to Zebedela, just out of curiosity, was really to find Schlesinger's grave because he's buried up there. Um, I found these amazing like Cape Dutch buildings out in the middle of the farm, which are, I mean, the farm's gone through some pretty hectic um, ownership. You'll see from some later pictures that it's not too bad. I gather they got some farmers from Uitenhage in to help them kind of get it back slowly in shape. But I mean, it's nowhere near what it used to be. And these offices are all mostly empty. But the buildings are still standing. These are some of the trees that I saw out there, and I was there a good 2, 3 years ago, so I'm sure it's doing much better by now. This is another one of the sets of the from the Rider Haggard movies. So he shot King Solomon's Mines and Alan Quatermain, which have both been made many times again. And few people remember that it was Schlesinger who made the very first ones, um, and the very first Blue Lagoon. Um, and so this he had a British director out for called, his name was Horace Lecoq, ended his life tragically a few years later in London by gassing himself. Um, but this was one of the sets that they created. Um, this is probably the biggest one, the biggest set ever that Schlesinger created. So this is the stairway from a famous scene in Alan Quatermain. So the tribe is called the Zuvendi, and they worship this great stairway. And so Schlesinger had really been he'd made outdoor movies. So from his great outdoor scenes and shooting on location with these thousands of people, suddenly after the Anglo-Zulu movie, he went to King Solomon's Mines and Alan Quatermain, which are, he'd really been after these movies and he got the rights from Rider Haggard. And he was very prescient in like deciding that adventure movies were the way to go. And so 1918 and 1919, he made these two movies. And Alan Quatermain, he needed this great stairway and he didn't know where to get it. So they considered using Jacob's ladder on St. Helena. I don't know if anybody knows St. Helena's ladder, Jacob's ladder, but it's about 700 steps just going up the hillside. But it was way too narrow. I mean, I don't know how he thinks he could have gotten his whole team out to St. Helena back in those days. And the other one was There was apparently a staircase at the Polana in Lorenzo Marx, which was owned. So Solly Joel was busy building the Polana Hotel, and there was a staircase down to the beach, and apparently that was not the right size either. So Schlesinger built it, and this was actually built into the side of a mine. So you can imagine that was actually a mine dump once upon a time, which he built. So, I mean, it's about the size of a 25, 30-story building. And one can imagine driving around in Johannesburg and suddenly you see this huge, I mean, that is kind of the scene out of Babylon, the movie that was made a few years ago. It was this kind of crazy, crazy, crazy era. And then there's not actually many that I came across. There wasn't a single full shot of the staircase. And given that this was a major work, I'm quite shocked that there wasn't a full shot of it that remains. And on the right-hand side here, you'll see those are actually fireworks. So there's a scene in Alan Quatermain where he goes through this underground river and there's a pillar of fire in it. And they used Zoo Lake for these scenes at night, and they got dynamite experts from Morderfontein to come and create these fireworks and create a pillar of fire, which I thought was quite amazing too. Um, Here's Schlesinger, and so this is the opening of the orphanage at Villa Arcadia, which was owned by Lionel Phillips and then bought by I don't know. I don't know if Schlesinger bought it or was it bought by a group of men, but Schlesinger was one of them. And Smuts to the left was opened it, and that's Rabbi. I think his name's Landau. He was I think the chief rabbi of Johannesburg. And this was the opening of the orphanage in, I think it was about 1923. Was it Oxburg? Oxburg was somebody in the audience will know who brought out the orphans from Eastern Europe. So most of them, I think, stayed in Cape Town, and then about 80 of them came up to stay at the Villa Arcadia. And then Lionel Phillips built somewhere else, I think. Um, Sorry. This was at the Empire Festival, the British Empire Festival in 1924, and Schlesinger had a big hand in creating this pavilion, which was highly praised in the press at the time. And he, never one to shy away from promoting his own businesses. There was a huge pineapple somewhere. Um, and, apparently the royal couple went past and they admired the pineapple, and the Queen of Italy came in and they said, "We've got to buy some of your product." And I think he had a canned fruit company. I think it was called Golden Reef. Um, and I think that was what the pineapple was selling. And then he had a room in the back where they showed his movies on like an ongoing reel, the kind of travel things of South Africa and a holiday in Port Elizabeth and all these things. He made a lot of these kind of educational industrial films, a lot of them for the Department of the Railways. There was no tourism back then. I think it all fell under railways. This is Mabel May, who was his starlet, and she became the leading lady and his leading lady, and he married her in 1923, 22, 21 at the West End Synagogue in London, which is how I got to know Geraldine through the wonderful folk at the West End Synagogue. And I spoke there a few months ago. So they got married there. I don't think she was Jewish, but they did get married there. And she was a young divorcee that had come out to South Africa with a touring group and became an actress and married him. And they had their one son, John. This was Blue Lagoon, made in 1923, which was, for all intents and purposes, Schlesinger's last movie in South Africa, before he moved across and started making movies in London, which is a completely other story, which is also fascinating, which he did for about 10 years, still keeping Johannesburg as his base. Um, And then this is just a picture of one of the movie houses he owned in Johannesburg, the Orpheum. Um, in the mid 1920s, he went on to making atmospheric theaters, which were like the ones going up in America and I think in Britain as well. Uh, um, the Roxy and the Fox in Atlanta and all these. So they would incorporate all these elements from the East or Europe into their theaters with, replicating an Italian village or, with stars that moved across the sky. And so this was the capital in Pretoria, which I think it's, yeah, this is just to give you an idea of all those dots in there. Um, sorry. All those dots there are IW's theaters or the theaters where he showed his products. So this covers obviously Rhodesia, Mozambique, and South Africa and Southwest Africa at the time. This was his house, I guess. This is Whitehall Court in Johannesburg, and he built this in 1923. And I think if you look at the buildings that if you look at a building that Marcus Lowe built on Long Island and the kind of the Gatsby area at the same time, there are a lot of similarities. But I think what his was a house, whereas this is an apartment building that kind of looks. I mean, I think Schlesinger was trying to incorporate like a house and an apartment building. So he would have an apartment, which was, I think, much of the second floor in the front of the building on the right-hand side there. Um, I don't very long, because I know he spent a lot of his later years back in the Carlton Hotel. I think Mabel, his wife, did as well. But I do think they lived there for a while. But it's still a very sought after address in Johannesburg. Um, Great building. This is inside, I think this is inside the Capitol as well. I mean, the most famous of his theaters is the Colosseum, which is there and there at night. So the Colosseum was built in 1933 and magnificent theater. He brought this artist Rene Shapshak out from France to do all the friezes. He had William Timlin, who did that famous children's book, do a lot of the interiors. So the child who went to the moon, or you'll know the name. I mean, the credentials of people who put this building together are amazing. And then he had his friend Jan Smuts, who wasn't the prime minister yet. He was the deputy. He had him open it, not Barry Herzog. Okay, and that's at nighttime. So he wanted to turn Johannesburg into his like Great White Way, like Broadway, with all his theaters down it. And then this is his gravestone, which I came across, which was quite an experience to find. Um, so they didn't really know where it was. They knew it was on Zebedela, but I got steered in very different directions by people on the farm, and they told me to watch out for snakes when I was walking through the bush. And I finally found two guys who thought they knew where it was, but they didn't know where it was either. So we just started wandering, and then we finally somehow came across this set of gates in the middle of nowhere. And then you could find through the bush, you could find this kind of a roadway, and then finally it ended at these two gravestones. Um, and I think is it the Chevra Kaddish in Petersburg used to look after this, but yeah, that's not happening, hasn't happened for a while. But they were super excited, these guys, because still on Zebedela they talk about the little American, and I don't think any of them knew who he was. And this kind of brought things a little bit together. Um, Here is, you can see it's the middle of nowhere, him and Mabel out in the middle. I mean, I was told it was on the top of a kuppie, but it really isn't. It's kind of really in the middle of nowhere. This then, I don't know if it started yet, is the video. So these are the first is an Italian movie, the second is The Birth of a Nation, and the third is I hope this is the right video. The third will be Footrekkers, and the fourth will be Symbol of Sacrifice. Lionel Phillips's house. So it was a mansion. It was a mansion in the best part of
Uh,
Johannesburg.
oh, yeah, no, I know. Oh, so they converted Lionel Phillips' house into Arcadia?
Hmm. It was called Villa Arcadia.
Oh, I see. Okay, okay.
So they've got a
Okay.
big they've got a big plaque on the back
Mm,
with all the names of the contributors and the people, the kids that were
mm,
there.
okay.
So it's owned by Hollard. It's owned by Hollard now.
Oh, okay. My daughter was working for them. Um, yeah, no, it's
Anybody else?
fascinating.
Can I say something from my telephone? Can you hear me? I would like to say that first of all, I'd like to ask if there's anybody who has connections in Hollywood. I mean, there may be some people listening from here who are connected, who might be able to connect it with Scorsese or people who are interested in reviving old films. And the second thing I wanted to say was that I've just posted a story about the Ochberg orphans on the memoirs page of the whole website.
Yeah, I mean, I must say when I was doing research, it was things like the Ochberg story, which I'd never heard of, which there were so many little strands of stories that came in, which were of course fascinating. Yeah.
Ma?
Whose
Naomi?
article have you posted, Geraldine, on the Ochberg? Because there are quite a few of us who've written about it.
Well, I was sent an article by Michel Levine, a French writer who'd written about it. So I've posted his article, but I've also mentioned at the bottom other things that are on the internet. For instance, there is an Ochberg site about Isaac Ochberg and the orphans. So there's with maps and everything. So I've put a link to that as well. But it's just interesting that that's come up today when I just posted that yesterday. So interesting. But, you know, Schlesinger is obviously unbelievably a rock on which Johannesburg is built. So it's a really fascinating story and definitely worth telling and seeing if we can help to resurrect these films.
Yeah, I mean, some interesting things have been happening. It's totally serendipitous. So a lot of the films so the National Film Archives in South Africa are like everything the ANC runs are totally into the ground. The film archives in Pretoria are so sad. They think they have about 5 or 6 of his 40 movies in the archives, but they're not sure. They definitely don't have any working machinery to watch them with. Um, and so, I mean, the state it's pretty sad. But what's happened though is suddenly the government had a bunch of money. I think Ramaphosa, for some reason, wanted to do something, and he threw a bunch of money at training people how to digitize old films. And so thousands of African mirror segments have been digitized within the last year, just out of nowhere. I mean, somebody stood up at one of the book readings to tell me this, and it was the first any of us had ever heard of it. And apparently, the next thing they're going to do is they're going to start digitizing some of the older South African movies, but they said not Schlesinger's for some reason, or that's not what they've like been told to do yet. So things are happening, and I did hear that the Jewish Museum in Cape Town was thinking of doing an IW exhibit. um, I'm not sure about that. But it's interesting how many people that the book has suddenly brought out. I met this very interesting guy in Johannesburg. He's at I think, do any of you know is it Jewish old age home out in like Sydenham Way? Anyway, his name's Meir Levine. Does anybody know Meir Levine? Anyway, he worked in film, and it's fascinating. He gave me like a flash drive with so much old stuff on it. He was sitting in his bed, kind of with this big mane of hair, um, telling me these stories, and it was just fascinating. And I think a lot of these old timers are really happy that they can revive the story or that it's being revived. And I just wish that some museum or somebody can kind of capture all of this. There's also a guy in Johannesburg who has a film editing studio, and he's collected so many of the old things of Schlesinger's studio, even the name, that the sign for Kilani that used to be on the gate, which, I mean, it's a museum in itself. So there's all this stuff out there, and I mean, I'm glad it's not lost. That I wish somebody could bring it all together. I,
From the South African Jewish Museum is somewhere listening in the background. So, Gavin, if you are around, perhaps you could say something, because he mentioned there might be an exhibition. So, if somebody can pull it all together, and, you know, as I say, we've got people listening now from all over the world, and they may have some connections to help you with.
Yeah, I know that would be amazing. I mean, I honestly don't think this man has gotten the attention he deserves by any means. He really was world class, totally world class. Anyway, I see Naomi's had her hand up for a while there.
Thanks, Ted, for your interesting talk. Really enjoyed it. Just give us a bit more history on Zebedee, because his influence in that area was huge. Part of the theme for this month is about the agriculture So if you would just give us a bit more information on that.
So I must tell you, I mean, agriculture wasn't really wasn't the reason that I wrote the book, but of course I came across a lot of stuff and then I started getting detoured because it was another rabbit hole to go down. And I mean, Zebediela was very interesting because, he always set out to make the biggest of anything that he did. When he started his pineapple estate in Langholm, he wanted it to be the best in the world, and he reckoned his pineapples were better than the ones in Hawaii. They got all their machinery from Hawaii to do the canning. So it was always the best, and the Orange Estate was going to be the biggest in the world. Of course, he was comparing himself to, I guess, to California or Florida. Um, and I mean, when they wrote at the time, it was the biggest in the world. I'm not sure because, of course, I don't think they had the means to calculate back then. Um, it's like when they say the size of a crowd nowadays. I mean, you really don't know whether it's 10 or 100,000 or whatever. But I'm sure it was one of the biggest in the world. And I think one of the interesting things about it, I think that he had he never said it himself, but I think he and Sir Percy Fitzpatrick did not like each other. Fitzpatrick definitely did not like him, and I think he was a bit of an anti-Semite, to be honest. Um, he wrote to the Colonial Office in England about this guy, and he always gave the wrong initials. He said I.J. Schlesinger or something, or this German, I don't know, he said this German Jew or something like that. And he said he's like sending his spies into my company to learn about my business. And it so happened that Fitzpatrick was also in the orange business, and I think he owned Zebediela before Schlesinger. And he also had wanted to turn it into some kind of agricultural property, and then he hadn't, and Schlesinger had bought this property, and then Fitzpatrick went down to the Sundays River area and in the Eastern Cape and started, I think, doing oranges or something down there, and then Schlesinger followed him. And then the reason that Fitzpatrick wrote to the Colonial Office was that he felt there was a guy, um, his name escapes me at the moment, but he was a theater owner in Johannesburg who was one of the companies that Schlesinger had bought out when he bought all the entertainment enterprises in South Africa. And Kingdon, that was his name, Kingdon. And Kingdon became Schlesinger loved to use his people in different fields. So he would like chop and change and so he took this entertainment guy and he put them into his like agriculture unit, or he just made him one of his free agents. And suddenly Kingdon was knocking on Fitzpatrick's door saying, I no longer like Schlesinger. I want to come and work for you. And of course, Fitzpatrick smelled a rat and he thought, well, this is Schlesinger wanting to send one of his agents into my company to find out what I'm doing. And of course, the whole thing kind of came to nothing in the end. And Kingdon had not fallen out with IW. He was still working for him. But, nothing came of Fitzpatrick's kind of letter. But, and so and Schlesinger moved into the Eastern Cape then as well. There's a whole story also about, I don't know if any of you know the story of Kendrew. So Kendrew was a small town in the Eastern Cape that apparently there were big plans for through Schlesinger, but it turned out to be a bit of a bum steer, and I don't know, all the place the place was abandoned after a while, and I don't know the whole story there, but I always love the intrigue that surrounds Schlesinger. Anyway, I don't know if that answers your question, Naomi, but it's kind of as much as I know about that.
Thank you, because I know that they then set up the Zebediela Trust, and as you that was handed over subsequently.
You're talking about the handing over to the local community.
Yeah.
I mean, that was just like that's where the trouble started.
Yeah,
And so they didn't really know what to do with it.
correct. They didn't know how to maintain an orange industry.
And that's why, as I said, when I went there a couple of years ago, I heard that these farmers from Uitenhage, which is a big orange growing area, had been brought up to manage the estate.
Right.
And that's why I think you see those groves growing again. But I mean, he had, I don't know, 15,000 hectares or something under tree. And
because today I think the biggest orange growers actually in that part of the world are the Joubert family. who've got these huge farms on the way to Nelspruit. So they took over with the Schlesingers' empire, ended up folding.
Well, I mean, it's nice. It's nice to see that it's actually getting back to something again. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even expect to see an orange estate out there. It's so dry and forlorn. I just, and then you come across this incredible grove of greenery. It was quite amazing to see.
Well, Oranges was
He built a dam and
He built two dams. Yeah.
to make the water for that. I think we have, I don't know if Zara Aginsky is still on this Zoom, because she is going to talk to us about her family, Solomon's orange groves near Nelspruit. So Zara, are you still around? Are you on the Zoom? Do you want to say anything? Is Zara there?
muted.
Yes, hi, I am here. Thank you, Ted. Your presentation was great, very interesting.
Thank you.
Yes, my family, yeah, I'll talk about it on the 18th. But they had the Crocodile Valley citrus estate in Nelspruit.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll hear more about that in 2 weeks' time.
But Charlotte wants to ask a question.
Hi, I come from Petersburg, and I've written about the history of the area. So I know about the Schlesingers. I don't know if you know the story that first his wife was buried at Zebedela, and a few years later he died, and he was also buried there. And the Petersburg Hevra Kadisha came out to bury him. And while they were standing there, they were talking, and they were saying that nobody had ever paid the account for Mrs. Schlesinger's burial. And John was standing there, and he got such a fright. He says, no, we'll see to it straight away. And within a couple of weeks, they'd paid for both burials, plus they'd given a huge donation to the Petersburg Hevra Kadisha. So I thought it was an interesting story to add to it.
Yeah, she died quite a long time after him, though, hey? So I don't know whether it was maybe his burial that hadn't been paid for.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, she died probably at least 10, 15 years later.
Yeah, it must have been the other way around then.
So it's a story about did you show the picture of their graves?
I did.
Ted?
What's the dates on there?
Nothing, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, John, you mentioned John Schlesinger. He's a story altogether. Yeah, he's a story. I do know that I don't know if any of you know Schlesinger's grandchildren. The grandson and the granddaughter are still alive in England and in America. Yeah. Anyway. So anyway, any other questions?
Can you tell us about the grandchildren?
Who's asking that? Charlotte.
Sorry, I shouldn't have done that, but I've got to leave the Zoom. I've got another Zoom. It's Veronica again. Can you tell us anything about the grandchildren? I would be very interested.
I don't know. I mean, I think they probably have stayed low for a reason. I don't think things ended very happily with what happened to Schlesinger's estate. I feel as though John was probably largely responsible for that, and what transpired while he was trying to run the company. But I mean, I think also nobody was able to micromanage the way Schlesinger himself did. So I think John was given this huge task, which he probably wasn't able to meet. And nobody can really say where the Schlesinger money went to, and there was apparently a lot of it. So it's a great mystery. But I think the grandchildren are kind of left with the mystery now. They don't really know what happened to it all.
Okay.
Sometimes there isn't any money left. It's all been spent on all his projects. So
Yeah, I think it's a little bit, I think it's a little bit more mysterious than that. Anyway, we've got Ronnie.
Thank you. You've really given us lots of information. Did he ever make money from his films?
No. I think, when at the end of the day, I think the movie that he made money from was The Voortrekkers because all the Afrikaners went to see it. And maybe The Blue Lagoon because it was kind of a little bit risque. You had this photograph or poster of these two semi-clad teenagers under a palm tree. Um, but at that stage, he'd really given up on shooting movies in South Africa, and he started making them in London, and that kind of was a disaster as well. And he had a major fire at his studio, and one of his lead cameramen died while he was shooting the movie on Capri. But he had some amazing plans for shooting movies in England and Europe. But of course, as I said, that's a whole other story. It's another book which I wish I could actually write because I've got all of the information about what he did in Europe and England.
Ted, were his films shown then, besides in South Africa and the UK, were they shown in other countries?
Yes, I think so. I think they were shown, if you read some of the old magazines, I know they were shown in Italy. Of course, in those days, because they had intertitles rather than because there was silence, they could quite easily do that. I mean, I think his films did very well in England, but I hope there are not too many people in England there. But the bar was very low in England. Apparently, that's what Schlesinger kind of made use of when he moved his studio to London was British movies were really poor. And I mean, even the British press said, our movies are terrible and we really can't compete with the Americans and the French and the Germans. We got to do something. And so Schlesinger came in and he said, I want to start making movies on the American theme. But he was very kind of moral. So he wanted to make movies that everyone could go and see. That was like very important for him. Whereas American movies were seen as quite trashy. So he wanted to make slick movies, but that everyone could go and see. So he was very astute, but none of them made money. And I think that was one of the interesting things about Schlesinger is that for a man who really dropped anything that wasn't making money, with all the ventures that he tried out, and he would try out everything in movies, he was transfixed by the whole idea, I think, and despite all the signs to stop making movies, he took a long time. His theaters made money though. His movie houses made money, and of course everything in South Africa that you see today that has to do with television or movies comes from him. Ster-Kinekor, Mnet, all of that all comes from him. You scratch a little bit on any of these companies and it'll all lead back to Schlesinger.
You also mentioned Eric
Say again, Ronnie?
Rosenthal's unpublished manuscript. Could you give us more information? Is it available? Does his son Richard have it? Or is it on YouTube? Or where did you find it, Ted?
You're talking about Rosenthal.
Yeah, Eric Rosenthal's unpublished manuscript on Schlesinger. Can I not tell you?
It's very difficult to find. It's also very unreliable, to be honest. Rosenthal was quite quite famous as a cut and paste man. So he used to take huge tracts of information and just cut them out of a magazine and put them into, which he did a lot of that with Schlesinger's. He cut the pieces out of Stage and Cinema magazine and he put it into the interesting parts I found were the interviews that he did with Albrecht and with his chauffeur, Max Sassman. So those are the more reliable plot. But there's a lot of stuff that I found I just couldn't rely on it. So there's part of it is available in Cambridge. The one half is available in Cambridge. I don't know what happened to the other half. The copies in South Africa all got lost for some reason at the National Library. Yeah.
What you're describing is how Eric Rosenthal operated. He had a room with a bevy of women in who would do his cutting and pasting, looking,
I can believe
researching.
that.
And what you've described is exactly how he created his books. Obviously, it wasn't edited. He would then afterwards edit it. But it was unpublished, therefore it was in a rough state. You mentioned
Yep.
80 companies. What other fields was he involved in? Sorry, that's
Well, I
my
mean,
last
they don't
question.
mention all of them. That is actually out of Rosenthal. So I mean, it's I can read so they have like I've got it in the back of the book here. So it's a quote from Rosenthal. I don't know where it is, but there's a I mean, it was advertising, it was banks, it was insurance, it was all the agricultural things. It was he started the drugstores called Publix. There was shipping that he was involved in for a while. There were ancillary companies to his real estate, which was building houses. Um, I mean, it just went on and on and on. Okay, bazaars for some at some stage. Um, so yeah, I mean, it's just even those 10 or whatever I've named there are just so disparate. It's just incredible that he could kind of handle all of them.
Radio.
Radio, of course, people forget the radio bit. That's also a fascinating story. How he took Durban radio, Johannesburg radio, Cape Town radio, and they were all going under. And of course, he amalgamated them and created the African Broadcasting Corporation, which then he sold to the government as SABC. So that was him as well. I've got is Naomi. Does Naomi want to ask a question?